Shensu grabbed the wounded man and yelled for Sergeant Lee, but the noise of the tank and Li Peng's focus on navigating back to the British lines made his cries fruitless. Su grasped number three's hand and struggled to assess the damage in the dark tank. He saw that the wound was in the man's belly. The whites of number three's eyes were catching enough of the flashlight's beams for Su to see them rolling in his head. The shock of the initial wounding gone, he sucked in a raggedy breath and used it to scream. The keening wail echoed in the tank, singing a horrifying off-key duet with the Daimler night engine. Su heard the banging of Sergeant Lee's wrench on the hull. He looked to the tank's stern and saw Li Peng pointing to the left. Su leaned over his wounded, nameless companion and grabbed the lever, yanking it out of gear. The tank turned 5 degrees and Li Peng dropped his hand. Shensu slid the lever back into gear and they surged forward again, climbing suddenly at an angle. It seemed they had pitched up close to 45 degrees, and Su had memories of the Atlantic crossing, cresting a wave in the hell of the ship's hold, then splashing down on the other side. He braced himself, but could not do the same for number three. When the tank reached the apex of the British trench line and tipped forward, crashing down onto its belly, number three screamed again as they pitched forward, falling out of his seat and slamming Su into the engine block. Su's ears rang from the hit. He felt blood coming down the back of his head from a cut on the crown. The tank settled onto flat ground, and Shensu heard Sergeant Lee banging again, commanding him to turn. But in the cramped space, he was wedged tight between number three and the tank's steel floor plates. There was more banging of a spanner on hull. Then the tank jolted to a halt. Long seconds passed, and then Chang and Sergeant Lee were pulling number three off Su. Sergeant Lee got number three into his seat and tried to assess the wound while Chang grabbed Shensu and sat him up. "Are you shot? Did they get you?" Chang asked, breathless. No, I'm all right." Su pushed himself off the floor and sat back into the chair. Chang stared at the bullet holes in the tank armor and the corresponding one in the small of number three's back. "How the hell is this tank a good thing to have if bullets will just go straight through it like a wicker basket?" "Only special bullets get through this armor," said Sergeant Lee. "Bullets as likely to blow up the rifle that fires them as they are to hit us. We're okay." "Tell that to number three. Tell that to the British fellows who were supposed to be piloting this thing," Chang replied. Sergeant Lee eased number three back in his seat. The man had passed out cold. Shensu wished he could remember the man's name. After all, he was the one who had recruited him for the mission, and now the responsibility for his death seemed to settle onto Shensu's shoulders, along with the weight of the other 4 men they'd lost. "Is he dead?" asked Chang. "Not yet. Will be soon," replied Sergeant Lee. "Shensu, you're going to have to work both sides till we get back behind the lines. Yeah?" Shensu nodded. Sergeant Lee led Chang back to the driver's seats and shifted the tank into gear. The engine roared and they jumped forward again, caterpillaring away from the battlefield. Shen watched for Sergeant Lee's signal, glancing at number three's sagging form, watching the breathing grow weaker by the moment. By the time they reached the rear of the British lines, the breathing had ceased. Number three's bowels emptied into his trousers, and then he was gone. Shensu stopped in the snow and caught his breath, overwhelmed by the memory of nameless number three's death. An exhausted sob burst out of him. As his shaking legs recovered, he reined in the emotion before it could overwhelm him. He heard more howling erupt in the distance. He knew he had to be close now. He set his teeth, leaned forward, and soldiered on.